Hey, welcome back everybody. Glad to see you made it again. Before we dive into today's RD-6 adventures, a little show and tell from last time. I pressed the wrist pin out of broken number 1 piston far enough to remove the rod to be able to do a comparison with a good straight rod from my spare parts stockpile. So we'll align the bottom ends and yep, look up at the top. One of these things is not like the other. So just wanted to show you all that. On the topic of spare parts, quite a few people last time asked me what my plan is regarding all the trashed parts that we've been finding in the engine. Not everything is available anymore. Some of the stuff is getting pretty hard to find. But the good part of it is I first discovered that bent rod and broken piston around 2012, 2013. Somewhere in there. So I've had about 12 years to slowly accumulate bits and pieces as I've run across them. So I do have a little bit of a part stash already built up. Other exciting news, a couple days ago I sealed the deal on another one of these to be used as a parts tractor to lend pieces to the project, and it's about a 5-minute drive in that direction right there. So that's exciting. Last frequently asked question, people are like, what's the deal with the red truck always in the background? Well, because the shop is way up over there and I'm working outside here, the red truck is just my toolbox now. It has all the things in it that I need. Saves me a lot of steps back and forth. Getting back to the RD-6 project now, we are at the point of having to remove what's left of the engine from the chassis. And what's left of the engine is still way too heavy for any of the equipment we have here just to unbolt and pick it out. So we could keep lightening it up. We could take front cover off, cam out, timing gears out, oil pan off, and then I think we could probably lift it. The problem with that though, and the reason why that approach is not going to work, is how this machine is put together. To get the oil pan off, we would need to get this big mainspring out, okay? That involves disconnecting these links, that little equalizer spring, and some pins in here on each side where it saddles onto the track frames. So once all of that is loose, you would jack the front of this machine way up to get the engine or the oil pan off of that mainspring. These are your best jacking points, these big mounting bosses here. But if I already had the front cover off, this front edge of the pan would be unsupported. It would probably still hold it, but I'd rather have that front cover in place, making sure everything is nice and solid. Complicating matters further is the rather small opening that I'll have to work through in order to free those stuck pins that anchor that spring into those saddles. 3 years ago, I would have crawled in there with the torches and a handful of tools and just stayed there until the job was done. But since the detached retina that I had in my right eye and the surgeries to put it all back together again, awkward working positions like that are only something that I can do for short amounts of time. That's going to exceed my limit. When I get down there and blood starts rushing to my head, my eyeball starts getting funny and I have to get out. So I have to find ways to do things differently now. So think about this for a second. We're already planning a full rebuild of this whole machine, which means the whole thing has to come apart at some point anyway, which means we might as well just start doing some of that work now. So I'm going to split tracks, get those out of the way. Then I'll take these heavy solid cast idler wishbone pieces off, which will then give me free and clear access to those stuck saddle pins on each side, which will then hopefully reduce the overall distance that we have to jack the front of this tractor to get that big mainspring out to work on getting the rest of the engine out. It all makes sense. Let sink or swim, let's dive in and we'll just do it. It's going to be more work, but I think it'll make it an easier job. Only one way to find out. Let's get started. Okay, some preps to do before splitting track. Locate the master pin. Here is ours, and you want it positioned like so at the front and rather low on the idler. And I have positioned the other track the same way. Here we are. The way you accomplish that, well, I jacked one side up at a time, and then I would block the steering clutch lever back for the other side to neutral that side out, put the transmission in gear, and then manually bar the engine over until that pin walked around to where I needed it. Then I would let this side down, I jacked the other side up, blocked the steering clutch back on the other one, and repeated the process. You will then want to put blocks under this forward link so that when you drive that pin out, they'll hold that up just a bit. And because we're splitting tracks on both sides, that's going to mean that the drive sprockets will not be in much contact with the chains anymore. So I'm also blocking that rear link just behind the sprocket to act as a parking brake, because once these tracks are looped off, these rollers are going to want to roll up or down those rails, whichever direction gravity is going to want to take them. So that's just some added insurance. Now we slack track. 1.1/8" socket loosens these two nuts. They exert pressure upon this cap, which acts as a clamp on the track adjusting nut right here, holds it in position. So with those two backed off, tap that cap a little bit to loosen things up, and we're ready to turn. I'll take these track covers off so that you can get a better view. We're under attack! Sounds like fireworks. So that you can get a better view of the recoil spring system. We've got two springs at play. There's a smaller coiled spring inside of this larger outer one, and a giant bolt goes through the middle of all of them. The one end of the bolt goes through the main adjusting nut here. Now there's a secondary nut under this cover that tensions a plate. That plate compresses these springs, and this other guide plate on the other end is the backstop. And they've got about 8,000 pounds of pressure on that spring, compressing them at all times. And this acts as a fail-safe for your track tensioning system. If you were to pick up an object that wedged between the track chain and the idler, it's going to need to create some space in order to travel around and pass back out. So that object wedges in here, pressure builds, it will then compress these springs a little bit more by forcing this big yoke housing back along the track frame. So that creates clearance enough for that object to roll around. When it comes back out again, that spring decompresses, pushes everything back out to where it used to be, and your track tension is returned. That saves your whole tensioning system, that saves your drive line, but the giant bolts that go through these springs have been known to snap. When that happens, it's like a cannon shot, or like you just heard a minute ago, and all that stored energy can suddenly release. You're safe as long as the track is still on, but once you take the track off, just be mindful. These things have been known to go boom before. The track adjusting nut takes a 2 3/4 inch sized wrench. I have the original Caterpillar 3B 3874 track adjusting wrench from the RD-6 toolkit that I'll be using. All right, humpy track got slack. So now we work on the master pin. This is an updated set of track chains over what came on this tractor originally, so it also has the updated pin. This is a hollow center double taper plug master pin. So you have a larger taper plug that's driven in on this side, and a smaller taper plug driven in on this side. And both sides have slits. Okay, and those taper plugs expand this hollow master pin at those slits and tighten it up in the link bore. Keeps it all in place. So the way you take this master pin out, you start by driving on this smaller taper plug, and you drive it in and all the way through the hollow center of that pin until it comes up against the backside of the larger taper plug. You keep driving on it until you get the larger taper plug out, and those slits then allow that hollow pin to collapse inside of the link, and then you can more easily drive that pin body out. Now, a little bit of heat will make this job a lot easier, but I'm not turning anything red. That's too hot. We're just getting this so that you can sizzle spit, okay? Spit on it, and it wants to pop and steam and all that good stuff, but just put that plug through a heat cycle. Now we wait for those taper plugs to cool and shrink just a bit. So we can spend some time talking about this tool I built the other day. This is not something I made up just to be fancy or extravagant. This is something that every old Caterpillar mechanic I've ever talked to has had versions of made up and carried with them in their tool trucks. This is a taper pin driver holding bracket, and this frees up both of your hands so that you can just swing away on those taper plugs. This is something that will definitely make this job easier. It's worth just spending a little bit of time knocking it together out of scrap steel like I did here. So 2 different sleeves. Those sleeves are what hold your driver, and we have that bolt and nut there. That's what these 2 holes are for. So this bracket will bolt onto the track pad using these accessory mounting holes that are already in place, and it will anchor in just like that. So this bottom hole and sleeve will hold the driver square with that smaller taper plug. And the reason why we have 2 holes and 2 sleeves is so that we can flip it over and do the other side with it. So that's the reason for that. So there's our bolt holding the bracket. Driver then goes in. There we are. We're centered with that taper plug. Now we just swing. And 1 strike is all it took. Of course, that heating cycle really helped the cause. So I'll pull the driver out because I made a second longer driver to extend in further and contact that outer taper plug. And why the need for 2 drivers? Why not just make one long one from the start? Well, it's best to have the striking surface closer in to the work. If you have a long shank sticking out, you can get deflection, and you lose some of the force of the hammer blow. Okay, I think it's worth having 2 different drivers to keep all that nice and short, keep it contained right to the work. That bang you just heard, my plug, one bounced way over there, the other one's right here. That bang is this cut off end of a drum that we usually cover the vise on the outdoor table with. That was my catcher. Make sure we didn't lose them. Small one, big one bounced out. Old iron lovers wine corks right there. That's what they remind me of. Did pretty good on that one. Yeah. Whether controlled or slightly uncontrolled, we find a way. Didn't hit anything. All right, that opened us up quite a bit. So to remove these heavy idler yoke castings, we start up here at the front. So we have two guide brackets, an outer one here and an inner one right here. They're both the same. Each one is held on by 4 bolts. You need a 15/16 size wrench to take those bolts out. So with the bolts out, we can take these guide brackets off. We need to get them off because they wrap around this channel edge right here. It'll just be easier to pick this thing instead of trying to slide it off the front. So that's the reason for that. So once we get those apart at the front, then we'll move back here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts that are a 3/4 size head. That will disengage the yoke casting from this plate. And last, we take these guide rods off because they go up into this yoke housing far enough that we can't get the yoke housing off of them before it hits the saddle for the leaf spring. So we have to get them out of the way. And just my luck, as soon as I turn the camera off, I finally break a bolt right there. Oh well, I'm sure there'll be more. This other one I have to do by hand because the impact socket is too thick to fit around the top one so close to the bracket. But no heat required on these. But these are those authentic cat bolts too. You cannot beat those old cat bolts for coming apart. They get rusty and they do get somewhat stuck, but most times they just don't give you any problems. Look at that. Holding us over here and I don't know what it is. I think I have it figured out. It's our mainspring. This bottom leaf right here is broken. Big gap right here, so this bottom leaf migrated out and the broken edge was hooking under that yoke casting. Here's a better look at what I'm talking about. That should not be sticking out that far. That's where it's broken, right in here. See that gap? Yep. That's what was hanging everything. Well, to finish up today, I want to get our bombs out. All that loaded spring pressure. So the way you do that is keep turning on the track adjusting nut until that large bolt that runs through the center of them is completely out of that nut. Then should be able to pick them right off the track frame. Well, here we are, everybody. The poor RD-6 is starting to look a bit like a beached whale, but we've gained access to those stuck pins and sleeves that I told you about way at the beginning of this episode. I'm not sure how I would have worked through that small opening and freed all that with all this debris that still has to be cleaned out. But yeah, the other side is just as stuck, probably twice as buried. But honestly, we found a lot of really rough parts here today, but I'm not too concerned about the condition of our undercarriage. You look at the inside of that bushing, that is not bad. The master pins did not show a lot for external wear on them. And rollers are looking good. Rails are looking pretty good. So there's a silver lining. I do need top carriers. They're pretty well hatched, but I've got something in the works for that. So, all right, yeah, tracks rolled back. We've got rain moving in tomorrow, so I'm going to cover the RD-6 and batten down the hatches for that. And then I'm going to clean up. So, a lot of work today, but gaining access to that mainspring, being able to work on all that better, I think we're ahead of the game by putting the work in now. So, I hope you all enjoyed this episode, and hope to see you back for the next one. Thanks again, everybody.